there's a real component between financial sobriety and mental health. And this is no joke. This drives anxiety and stress for people almost like no other. It's one of the big things. And so we understand and we need to forgive ourselves for any of the unskillful behavior that we've exhibited. I'm at the top of the list. As I mentioned, I've gambled, I've squandered money, I've made poor decisions in business, and I have needed to, and I have forgiven myself for being imperfect in this world. And now today I'm living out of the frequency of making those poor decisions. And when I feel that discomfort come up, I have to look at it and I have to talk to people about it who are wise counsel that can help me to make better and better decisions. So the point is I'm remaining humble, teachable. I'm remaining a student. I don't have all the answers. I'm moving towards this idea of financial sustainability and independence. What brave soul would like to jump in?
I will always go first.
Beautiful. You know that about yourself, Michelle?
I do know that about myself. I'll always jump in. I'm
Beautiful.
Michelle. I'm here in Austin, Texas, and I have a charming 31 days of sobriety today.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you.
Incredible.
Yeah. Thank 31. You so much. I have been in and out of the rooms really since I was a kid with my dad, so family history. And I originally got sober in 1995 at Venice Beach and stayed sober for several years, around 6 years. And then I moved back to Austin and just kind of lost my mojo. And I've been a gray area drinker since then, but I have always lived in your phrase that I love so much, Tommy, in the frequency of addiction. And so my question to you today is I would like to know if you would speak to us on the frequency of addiction around money, financial sobriety. I know for myself, but also so many other addicts that I know, both in and out of the rooms, struggle with this. For me in particular, and many people I know, a propensity to under-earn and all the sort of drama that unfolds around that, sort of living in a state of never having enough or getting a little, but then getting rid of it and then getting a little more and just constantly sort of spinning in that frequency. And I feel big pink cloud right now. It's so good. I love it when that happens. But I feel like a big frequency of change happening within me. And I'm super excited about that. I feel really empowered about it. But I'm just curious about this particular frequency. Money is something, it's not, as you say, none of us has to do drugs and alcohol, but we do all have to interact with money. And especially as I'm older, like when I was younger, I mean, I've always been just such a hippie flower child and money, ooh, let's just go to the beach. But now I'm no longer young and it's not exactly regret, but I feel concern about my financial future, what that's going to look like. And I don't know, I'd just like to hear your thoughts on it and I appreciate whatever you have to say.
Well, Michelle, I appreciate this inquiry more than I can express to you. And I have navigated the waters of challenge and confusion, a little bit of pain in there. There's definitely some suffering in there when it comes to the term you brought up, which is financial sobriety. There's also financial maturity. There's a financial awakening for many of us ahead of us, hopefully. And I've been through many of those, and I just so appreciate the inquiry. So I'm going to dive in here. To start, I would like to just, for those who are listening, Michelle brought up the concept of the frequency of addiction in this particular aspect of human experience, the financial side of our world. Of course, we're going to speak about creativity, abundance. Words like career might be used, our life path, all of this. But first, the frequency of addiction. For those who are not familiar, I came to a place in my recovery right around sort of between 9 and 12 years sober from drugs and alcohol. Those had been my primary addictions. When I put those addictions down with quite a bit of help and guidance and love, I would have an experience to start to live life and to experience life in all dimensions, many different experiences presented to me in those first 9 years of my recovery. And one of the things we joke about in recovery circles around the world is that when we put down drugs and alcohol, there's a few other things that start to show up, you know? And so we're talking about food. Food is one of the places that show up for people, you know, sex and relationships. That's definitely one of the places, and money and career and abundance. This is another place. So these are the places that we start to go and play. We play in the world. We're no longer playing with drugs and alcohol. Now we're going to have our continue our experimentations and our experiences with food, relationships and sex and money. And all of these things are what we might call, to varying degrees, necessary as a part of our experience, a part of our health, a part of our well-being. And so it makes a lot of sense that as people on a path of discovery, we're going to want to explore these things. Today, we'll talk about the financial side of this, financial sobriety, financial recovery. When I had an opportunity in those first years to start to feel into what I was experiencing, I had a lot of excitement. A lot of magic was taking place in my recovery, that first decade. A lot of joy and connection. And also, I was still in a lot of stress and a lot of worry. And I would say that I was acting out in certain ways, which were still addictive in nature. Things like smoking cigarettes, being, very codependent in my behaviors in romantic relationships in particular. And to a certain extent, struggling around food, although much less so that problem than the other two. Money and career was like, I should sometime share the full story of my relationship with money and career from when I got out of college to now, because it's an interesting story, and the word circuitous comes to mind. Not a straight line. About as I've circumnavigated the globe in terms of connecting with myself on that particular aspect of humanity. But as I struggled in relationships, and I struggled in my body, I struggled with my breath, struggled with smoking, struggled with codependency, struggled with my finances, and went into heavy debt and made some unskillful and poor decisions around money. As I struggled, I really recognized that I was still in addictive behaviors. My core addictions, or the ones I noticed the most, were drugs and alcohol, and those were gone. And I sincerely had no desire to go back. But I was still suffering in all these other ways. Now, I'll give you the punchline before the end of the story. Later on, when I started to practice yoga, and I started to work with the breath, and I started to develop a meditative practice, and therefore develop a meditative mind. And when I started to literally shift the energy in my body in ways that I could feel and actually tune into, I started to have these releases from a frequency that I had been stuck in. And when I had those releases at the tail end of these practices that I was doing, I would feel a sense of elation, presence, awareness, comfort, ease, connection, love, that I somehow seemed not to be able to access when I was in the normal frequency or energy that I had been feeling in my life. I opened my eyes after a meditation one day, and I said, I'm no longer in the frequency of addiction. That's literally how it came. And that's when I started to think about that idea of addiction kind of having a vibration all of its own, a frequency all its own. And there was a way that I could lift myself up above it. And the more of these practices and these principles and these ethics, this lifestyle, the more that I would expose myself to it, the more released from the frequency of addiction I seemed to be. So that was interesting that I had put down drugs and alcohol almost a decade before, but I was still struggling still in the same frequency that I had been in, and I didn't really recognize it. Now, when I speak to people across the world, they're like, oh my God, the frequency of addiction, it explains so much that I've been experiencing because I'm still stuck in these behaviors and these patterns that don't seem to serve me, even though my core addictions have been released. So that's for those who are listening or watching, that is a little bit of a precursor about the frequency of addiction, this energetic vibration that we carry when we're exposed to like what I would call the radio. The frequency of addiction is like a channel, a radio channel. You tune yourself to radio addiction. All of us would like to know, well, how can we turn the channel to some other channel, for God's sakes? Because I'd like to be on the channel of love, or I'd like to be in the channel of health, or the channel of connection, or the channel of recovery or spirituality. And I don't want to be on the channel of addiction. How can I change the channel? And so I've given the punchline. You can change the channel through practices and through many different things that we can do in the world to shift out of that frequency and to shift out of patterns of belief and behavior that no longer serve us. And now we come to the centerpiece of your inquiry, which has to do with the frequency of addiction as it relates to finances and financial recovery, financial sobriety. Just like any behavior, we have been trained to behave a certain way. We watch our parents react to emotion. Lo and behold, we find ourselves later in life reacting to emotion the same way. If we want to change the way that we react to emotion, we'll have to bring it to our awareness, and we'll have to work in a transformational way to shift. Same exact thing with money. Money is energy in the form of, it comes in many forms, really. But it's an energy of transaction. It's an energy of exchange. It represents, it can provide freedom of movement in certain ways within our world, but it isn't required for freedom of movement, which is interesting. Everybody has a training, a history, a childhood, if you will, around money. We'll call it, as many coaches and teachers call it, everybody has a financial blueprint. The financial blueprint consists essentially of the main and most powerful teachings and trainings you received consciously or unconsciously about money, usually in your earlier life, usually in your childhood. I'll give you an example from mine. Sunday nights in my home, when I was growing up, were the nights my mom closed the door to her bedroom, went in there by herself, opened up this huge black ledger. I can see it like it's in front of me today. Opened it up, and she started to write the checks that she needed to write for the week. The energy was intense. You know, the door was closed. Don't disturb mommy. Don't go in there on a Sunday night, right? And she's in there. And I can tell you from, having spoken with her in later years and other of our family members, my mother felt a great fear of economic insecurity. And on Sunday night, that economic insecurity played out in our house as she got ready to go and write all these checks. and that went into my mind as a feeling, as an experience. Money equals stress. Money equals lack. Money equals tension. So these ideas, these emotions, feelings, experiences around money, that starts to go into my being as part of my financial blueprint. Now, you said something very, very telling in your inquiry. You said, I grew up a hippie. And I grew up a hippie, and so money, ew. Now, very, very interesting. That is so helpful in understanding your financial blueprint. Somewhere along the line, money was cast as this bad thing, yucky thing, whatever your adjective might be for that. For me, it's tension and stress and anxiety connected around money. Other people have felt that money is only for people who are selfish or who exploit other people. Some people feel about wealthy people, oh, they're selfish and they don't care for anybody else. And they, in order to get their wealth, they had to step on somebody else. And sometimes we've heard hippies say these kinds of things that, money bad, money equals bad, 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 bad. Of course, money is not bad. It is also not good. It's just money. And the consciousness of the person that uses it is really what we're talking about here. So there's a great story about financial blueprint, about a man who was making a lot of money every year, like a lot. But when he went to do his books at the end of the year with his accountant, he always was right at about break even. He never made money, never profited money, never put money away. Made so much, spent so much. Never got ahead, wasn't really getting behind. But for someone who made this much money, it was such a mystery to this guy why he couldn't create profit in a profitable business. The financial blueprint for this guy was his mother used to tell him that people who had money were pigs. Literally, those were the words from his childhood, from his mother. People who have money, who have a lot of money, are pigs. So what was planted into this man's psyche was, my mother will never approve of me if I have money. An unbelievably powerful message. Now, it seems so pedantic. It seems so childish in a way. Oh, certainly we can get up above such a ridiculous thought. Of course, my mother's going to approve of me if I'm successful. Well, no. These are subconscious programs. And these subconscious programs run our conscious existence. Until we awaken to these subconscious programs, bring them up into the light of day, process through them and see them for the nonsense that they are, so that we can truly move forward and change our behavior around money. So this is really important for anyone listening, that there's a reason why we behave the way we do in all areas of our life, and especially money. We've been given clues, we've been given ideas, we've been given other people's opinions, and we took those lessons on as truth, and they now power and drive our behavior until they don't. Other people become very wealthy, and they have so much money, more money than they could ever spend, more money than their family could ever spend, and they're still miserable. Or they're still seeking or going after more because they have the disease of more. There's no amount of money that will ever be satisfying to somebody in that position. Just like there's no amount of drugs that will be satisfying to someone in the frequency of addiction when it comes to drugs. So there's the frequency of addiction with regards to economic insecurity, which keeps us in a state of debt. And there's a frequency of addiction that would keep us just simply seeking more, even if we have enough. On the path of yoga, we talk a lot about really the idea of understanding that enough is enough and not wanting to seek that which we don't need, not coveting something that's unnecessary in our life. For me, when I was in the frequency of addiction around money, it took the most extreme forms of money-based addiction. Debting. So that's being in a terrible state of debt constantly and carrying that stress and that worry. Gambling. Literally using this energy of money in a reckless and irresponsible way that, by the way, was creating a chemical reaction in my body similar to doing drugs. And of course, over shopping, hoarding, these kinds of things. We can bring workaholism in here as well, as it's related to the concept and the issue. So for me, in my family, from a financial perspective, to a great extent, I felt like an outsider. So very much a black sheep in my family up until, my recovery. Financially, certain wings of my family had more access to money than I did. And my family did in general. And so there was always a lot around, but you didn't necessarily have access to it, or you had to do unpleasant things to get it. So there was this disconnection between sort of what I'm seeing and what's real. Furthermore, I had very low self-esteem, and I never really learned or had the instruction as to how to make appropriate financial decisions for myself. And so I kind of went out, to Vegas on my own. I'll show them, I'll beat the system. And I placed myself so firmly into gambling addiction, so totally into the frequency of addiction around money. And I paid some unbelievable prices for that. Anyone who is familiar with gambling addiction, it is so painful and so challenging. And it's really replete with lies and shame and all of that. So as we move into recovery, the solution for this is the same as the solution for any addiction. Ground, sit down, slow down, calm down, connect with others in recovery, and start to learn what financial sobriety actually is. Financial sobriety is going to vary in definition from one person to the next. But there's some general things that we can agree upon. We start to tap into our own self-worth, and we realize that we have something to contribute to the world. That when we contribute to the world, we should be compensated for that. So right away, we are connecting our value and our worth with the idea that we should be compensated for sharing in that value and that worth. We begin to look at our desire, what our heartfelt desire is to do in this world, and how we want to engage and give to the world what we love, what we're good at. And we start to move in a direction of being able to express ourselves more meaningfully, more purposefully. Naturally, this brings us closer to the idea that we're going to be compensated for these efforts in the world. Not to pick on the hippies, because I have been one most of my life. The hippie way of doing this is like, it's not really looking at where you're at or what your needs are. It's necessarily just sort of, hey, I want to be in the flow. I'm just going to flow with everything all the time. And when we flow with everything, not necessarily consciously all the time, and we sort of go from one thing to the next, it's not necessarily a wise or skillful strategy that leads to happiness and actual freedom. On the surface, to the hippie or to the teenager, it might look like freedom. I get to do whatever I want, whenever I want. Whatever comes into my purview, I'll just follow that. I'm in contact with my higher power, and so this is the next right thing. Well, it might be the next right thing, But it takes a moment of reflection and to build one's capacity to discern what's true and what's not, to be able to start to make better and better decisions around money. So I was in debt for a long time in my life, and I made decisions which allowed me to live a certain kind of way while going into debt, while making decisions around the work that I would do, which had a lottery mentality to them. The lottery mentality. I'm always entrepreneurial. I'm taking huge risks up front for a potential payoff down the road. It's okay to do that as long as your immediate needs are being taken care of in the meantime. It's not so okay for me to do that if you're putting yourself and or your family at financial risk. So if you're dropping yourself into bigger and bigger debt and taking bigger and bigger risks in business, but those risks may or may not be playing out and you don't know when they're going to have their payday, that's what I refer to as the lottery mentality. Someday this is going to work out. And when it works out, it'll work out really big. Again, there may be people that have risk tolerance that's greater than mine, but even still, you'd want to meet the needs, the basic needs of your life. Pay your rent, eat the food that you want to eat, educate yourself in the ways you want to, have medical care when you need it, and be able to provide your children with education and a home and a loving environment with healthy food. Like to me, these are the basic things, and we don't really need much more than that. So then beyond that, then we ask ourselves, well, what are we going to spend our money on? What's responsible? What's not responsible? Each person has to make a decision for themselves. As I started to become financially sober, I started to get out of debt. I was able to manage the horrible feeling of being in debt, manage it. That means I'm getting through it, but I'm not thriving. In Recovery 2.0, we want everybody to thrive in life. So we have to look at these issues and we have to move out of debt in any form. So for me, I started to move out of debt and I started to feel lighter. It was good. I'm like, ooh, this feels good. And then I got out of debt. I no longer owed any credit cards, anybody money. And then I had an opportunity to buy a home and I was going to go into debt. And I talked to sponsors and teachers and I said, is it okay for me to buy this home and to go into debt? And in this particular case, for me, it was okay. It felt okay to buy this home, to borrow money from the bank to do it. And that I knew that I could pay the mortgage payments on time and that I would be able to do that and build equity in my home. And, many, many specifics around that. But the point is I checked in with myself and I checked in with my advisors because this had been a real problem for me. And I determined this is okay. Other people, it might not be okay for them. Credit card debt is really never okay for most anybody because it comes at such a high price. Credit card debt is so painful. And so as the quickest that we can get out of that, the better. So these ideas about financial sobriety are very important to explore. We all have our blueprint where we're coming from, our spiritual work, our work to become more aware and conscious of every area of our life are going to help us to make better and better decisions. Getting around other people who understand how to make money, how to protect money, and how to grow your financial resources is a very good idea to get instruction from people who know how to do that. The basics are, I need a job, I need some income, and I'm going to spend money, and I need to be making more money than I'm spending. And that's the basic. And I know for me, like even as recently as now, whenever I'm spending more money than I have coming in, there's a certain amount of discomfort there. It doesn't necessarily feel in alignment. So that needs to be addressed always for me. Finally, there's a real component between financial sobriety and mental health. And this is no joke. This drives anxiety and stress for people almost like no other. It's one of the big things. And so we understand, and we need to forgive ourselves for any of the unskillful behavior that we've exhibited. I'm at the top of the list. As I mentioned, I've gambled, I've squandered money, I've made poor decisions in business, and I have needed to, and I have forgiven myself for being imperfect in this world. And now today I'm living out of the frequency of making those poor decisions. And when I feel that discomfort come up, I have to look at it and I have to talk to people about it who are wise counsel that can help me to make better and better decisions. So the point is I'm remaining humble, teachable. I'm remaining a student. I don't have all the answers, but I'm moving towards this idea of financial sustainability and independence. I am financially independent, but the sustainability piece of it continues to grow, and the spiritual piece of it, the relationship with the energy of money, is something that I'm constantly, as a human being asked to refine and to look at and to grow through. So those are some of the ideas around frequency of addiction, especially as it applies to financial sobriety. I know some people listening have never heard the term financial sobriety before. And so thank you so much for bringing this up. It's such an important inquiry. It's one of the most important inquiries in areas of life that we could look at. I'd like to ask you now, Michelle, if you could tell me of anything coming up for you as you've heard me exploring this topic.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much, Tommy, for that gentle and thoughtful answer. I love the idea of a blueprint because, ironically, my father was a banker and successful banker, but there was just a tremendous amount. He was very unhappy man, living a life that he did not want to live, falling down drunk. And there was a tremendous amount of negative energy around money in my family. And I think that my reaction to it was just to get the hell away from it. So that was really food for thought, that blueprint. And the one thing I will say is that I feel so hopeful and so excited about changing my relationship with it. So I appreciate you so much for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. As you said that, a thought came into my head about living in the world and being comfortable with having things, especially things that you love. And so I live in the world and I have things that are meaningful to me. The most meaningful thing to me beyond anything else is healthy food. And it turns out that I spend a lot of money there. And so that's really important. But beyond that, there's things that are meaningful to me. I'm looking now right here, this piece of art behind me, which is the Sri Yantra, this beautiful, beautiful symbol of, well, there's, I can't go down that road right now, but symbol of everything, basically. And that was not an inexpensive piece of art, but it's so meaningful to me. It's something that my wife and I have in our home because it's so meaningful to us. And so, was that something I had to have in order to live? No, of course not. Is it something that enhances my life? Yes, it is. And it's such a beautiful thing. And I have a car and I have, these things. And I guess the teaching here is it's okay to own things. Just don't let them own you. And so I wanted to leave people with that. It's really fun to have fun things and fun experiences. And so these are good uses of money as long as they don't become attachments and addictions. So with that, thank you so much again, Michelle. Love you just so much. And thank you for this great inquiry today.